Beyond the gates, spoilers tease that something strange and unsettling is about to enter the life of Tyrell Richardson, a quiet, curious teenager still figuring out who he is in the shadow of his father, Martin. Tyrell's life is simple, structured, even dull. He goes to school, helps his father with yard work, and occasionally asks questions about the mother he barely remembers. Martin, for his part, tries to keep their world small, safe, and unremarkable. That safety is disrupted when a man named Kenneth arrives unexpectedly one afternoon. Tyrell is out front, shooting hoops, when Kenneth pulls up in a dusty sedan. He gets out with a smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes, extending a hand that Tyrell shakes more out of politeness than comfort. Kenneth introduces himself as an old friend of Tyrell's father, someone who knew Martin way back, before all of this. Tyrell, never having heard his father speak of this man, is intrigued. Kenneth carries the smell of smoke and the weight of stories. He speaks in a way that suggests he knows things not just about Martin, but about life, about the past, about how the world really works. For a teenager like Tyrell, who has only known the narrowed-down version of his father's life, Kenneth is fascinating. He tells Tyrell anecdotes about Martin, wild, unbelievable stories that don't match the stoic man Tyrell sees every day. Stories about narrow escapes, secret deals, nights that ended in gunfire. Tyrell laughs them off at first, thinking Kenneth is trying too hard to impress him. But Kenneth never once breaks character. He talks like someone telling the truth. Martin arrives home from work to find the two talking on the porch. The change in his expression is immediate. His entire body stiffens. He greets Kenneth without warmth, his voice low and edged with something Tyrell can't quite place: fear. The conversation is cut short. Martin sends Tyrell inside, and the two men step off to the side yard. From the kitchen, Tyrell watches through the window. They argue. Martin's voice raises just once, and then he drops it to a sharp whisper. Kenneth doesn't back down. He leans in close, speaks low, calm. Martin grips the back of his neck, then points toward the street. Kenneth nods, shrugs, and walks away without another word. Tyrell rushes to the front window to see Kenneth driving off. Later that night, Tyrell asks his father who Kenneth really is. Martin gives a vague answer: someone from his past. A guy he used to run with, but who got into trouble. Not someone you need to be around, Martin says. But the warning only fuels Tyrell's curiosity. Over the following days, Kenneth reappears. Not at the house, but at Tyrell's basketball games. At the gas station where Tyrell buys sodas after school. Once, even outside the school gate, leaning against the same dusty car, smiling like an uncle waiting to pick up his nephew. He never pushes, just talks. Always charming. Always relaxed. He drops small comments about Martin's past, letting them sit like seeds waiting to root. Tyrell starts asking more questions at home. About where his dad used to live. What he did before Tyrell was born. Who else he used to know. Martin grows more closed off. You don't want to know, he says. But that answer, more than any other, is the reason Tyrell does want to know. It doesn't take long for Kenneth to become a fixture in Tyrell's imagination. The mystery, the danger, the contrast with Martin's silent sight all builds a narrative Tyrell can't resist. When Kenneth finally invites him to take a ride, to see something from the old days, Tyrell agrees. They drive to a broken-down warehouse on the edge of town. Inside, Kenneth points to a room in the back. Your dad used to run this place. Not for long. Just long enough to know what he was capable of. Tyrell looks around, trying to picture Martin here. It doesn't fit. But Kenneth keeps talking about the choices people make, about loyalty, about power. Tyrell doesn't realize until later that everything Kenneth says has a double meaning. Martin finds out. That night, he confronts Kenneth outside his motel. It's not a casual warning this time. Martin is shaking. You go near my son again, I will end you. I don't care who you used to be. I don't care what you think you know. You stay away. Kenneth remains calm. He deserves to know the truth. You can't hide forever. He deserves a life, Martin snaps. One that isn't shaped by the mistakes I made. Kenneth studies him for a long moment. You think you saved him. Maybe you did. But now he wants to know who he is. And that part? That part you can't control. The next day, Martin doesn't go to work. He sits Tyrell down at the table, pours him a cup of coffee, and begins to talk. He tells Tyrell about a man he used to be. About choices made when the world felt like it had no doors. About Kenneth, who was once a brother in arms, a partner, and then a liability. He tells Tyrell about running, about starting over, about trying to be better for someone else. Tyrell listens, silent. Martin finishes with, I didn't want this life for you. But maybe I should have told you sooner. I was scared of who you'd see when you looked at me. Tyrell looks at him, really looks. You think Kenneth is dangerous? Martin nods. He doesn't care about you. He cares about leverage. About proving I can't escape him. That night, Tyrell deletes Kenneth's number. He blocks him. He erases the texts. But the questions remain. Not just about Kenneth, but about Martin. About legacy. About identity. Kenneth doesn't leave town. He waits. And Tyrell, standing between who he thought his father was and who he might become, begins to feel that the gates between past and present were never really closed to begin with. What comes next is no longer just about history. It's about survival. And choice. Kenneth's silence didn't mean he was done. He lingered in the town like a shadow just out of reach. Tyrell sensed it. A message here, a glance from a stranger there, and the paranoia that began to seep into Martin's world now slipped into his own. Martin had told him enough to raise alarms, but not enough to offer protection. Tyrell was old enough to sense that. At school, Tyrell grew more withdrawn. He stopped going to basketball practice. He avoided long walks home and spent more time inside, searching through anything his father had left lying around, old photos, loose papers, even a locked drawer in the study. When he finally found a key taped under Martin's desk, the drawer opened with a creak that sounded like a confession. Inside, a gun, a faded photograph of a much younger Martin and Kenneth, and a single folded letter addressed to someone named Elena. Tyrell didn't ask Martin about it right away. He hid the photo and letter, heart pounding. That night, Martin noticed the drawer had been disturbed. He didn't say anything at first, but the next morning, he asked Tyrell point blank, "Did you go through my things? Why do you still have a gun?" Martin stared at him. The answer came slowly. Because some ghosts don't stay gone. That was the moment Tyrell realized his father was still afraid not of what Kenneth had done, but what he might still do. Then Kenneth made his move. It started with a visit to Tyrell's school principal. Officially, he was inquiring about sponsoring a scholarship fund. Unofficially, he made sure the office staff knew his name, knew his face. And within days, he accidentally bumped into Tyrell outside the school. He smiled like nothing had ever gone wrong between them. Offered a ride. Tyrell refused. When Martin heard about it, his fear turned into action. He went to the police, but all they could offer were empty reassurances. Kenneth hadn't broken any laws. He wasn't on record. There was no restraining order. Your past isn't enough to justify a case, the officer told him. Unless he threatens you or your son, there's nothing we can do. So Martin did what he always did when cornered. He planned. He sent Tyrell to stay with a cousin out of town, claiming it was for a school program. Tyrell didn't buy the excuse, but didn't argue. He could feel the air tightening in their home, like something was about to explode. While Tyrell was away, Martin met Kenneth face-to-face at an abandoned warehouse, the same one Kenneth had shown Tyrell. Martin arrived with the gun tucked into his waistband. Kenneth was waiting. "You brought a weapon," Kenneth said, not surprised. "You won't get another chance. Stay away from him. You still think this is about revenge? About you? It's not. That kid wants answers. You can't lock him away from the truth forever." Martin stepped closer. "You think you know what's best for him? You barely knew me. You don't know who I became after you disappeared." Kenneth laughed. "You became a coward. You buried the past and hoped it'd die with silence." Martin pulled the gun. "Don't test me." But Kenneth didn't move. "You're not going to kill me." Not because you're weak, but because deep down, you know I'm right. Tyrell deserves the full picture, not the edited version you feed him. The standoff ended without blood. Martin left first, guns still in hand. Kenneth didn't follow, but he had planted something in Martin's mind. Back at home, Martin retrieved the letter addressed to Elena and read it again. She had been someone he loved once. Someone he left behind when he ran from the life he and Kenneth once lived. The letter was never sent. Maybe because Martin was scared. Or ashamed. Or maybe because he knew opening that door would mean acknowledging the man he once was. He mailed it that night. Tyrell returned days later to a father slightly more worn, a house slightly more quiet. Martin didn't mention Kenneth, and Tyrell didn't ask. But something between them had shifted. The tension no longer sat between them like a wall, it moved into the space behind them, like a ghost finally named but not yet exorcised. A week later, Elena showed up. She was older, tired, but unmistakably fierce. Her presence brought the past screaming back. Martin stood frozen at the door. Tyrell came down the stairs and stopped halfway. "Is he yours?" Elena asked. Martin nodded. "Yes." Tyrell looked between them. "Who is she?" Elena stepped forward. "I knew your father before he became the man you know. He didn't tell you everything. About us. About what we were running from." Martin cut in. "Enough. Don't dump this on him. He deserves to know." "He deserves peace," Martin replied. But it was too late. Tyrell had heard enough. That night, Tyrell confronted Martin. "Tell me the truth. All of it." So Martin did. He told him about a job gone wrong. About a betrayal. About Kenneth covering for Martin when things fell apart, taking the fall that allowed Martin to escape. About Elena and the child they almost had together. And how guilt, not courage, drove Martin to walk away from everything. Tyrell was silent for a long time. Then he asked the question Martin had been dreading. "Are you proud of who you became?" Martin shook his head. "No, but I'm proud of what I tried to protect." Tyrell left the house and walked. Past the school. Past the warehouse. He found Kenneth waiting near the diner. It was like he had known Tyrell would come. "He told me," Tyrell said. Kenneth raised an eyebrow. "All of it?" Tyrell nodded. "Enough. And what do you want to do now?" Tyrell looked him in the eye. "I want you gone." Kenneth's smile faded. "You're more like him than I thought." "Maybe. But I know how to end things clean. This chapter is closed. You show up again, I go public." Kenneth's eyes narrowed. He could see the conviction, the readiness. Not fear, not confusion. Just clarity. "Fair enough," he said, backing away. "But remember something. Every man inherits his father's shadows. What you do with them is up to you." Tyrell turned and walked away. Weeks passed. Martin began to sleep again. Elena returned to her own life. Kenneth didn't show his face again. Tyrell never stopped carrying the weight of those revelations, but he began to understand something his father once couldn't. Peace isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing what not to repeat. The past didn't vanish, but it no longer dictated the future. Tyrell had heard the stories, seen the scars, and walked through the storm without becoming it. And that, more than anything, was the legacy he chose to claim. The final test didn't come from Kenneth or Martin's past, it came from the choices Tyrell made with what he now knew. College applications landed on the kitchen table. One envelope in particular bore the name of a university halfway across the country, in a city none of them had lived in before. Tyrell held it in his hands, silent. Martin watched him from the hallway. "You thinking about leaving?" "Not to run," Tyrell said. "To build." Martin nodded. That word meant more to him than Tyrell knew. Before Tyrell left, he asked Martin to take him back to the warehouse. Not for nostalgia. For closure. Together, they stood in the space where fear had once ruled. The walls were peeling. The silence deep. Martin reached out and rested a hand on the wall. Tyrell did the same. "This isn't part of who I am anymore," Martin said. "But it's part of who you were. That's enough for me to know." They left without speaking again. Elena visited before Tyrell departed. She brought with her an old photograph one Martin had taken, long ago. In it, 3 people stood side by side, her, Martin, and Kenneth. The picture was frayed at the edges, sun-worn and creased. "This is what we were," she said, pressing the photo into Tyrell's hand. "Don't ever let the world rewrite it for you. Not even your father." Tyrell kept it in a book he took with him to school. The move was quiet. No drama. No sudden appearances from the past. Just a father helping his son load up a car. Just a mother figure offering a hug at the curb. Just a young man stepping into a world larger than the shadows that shaped him. In his dorm, Tyrell placed the photo beside his bed, not out of sentiment, but as a marker. A reminder of the storms survived. Of the voices that tried to shape his story. And of the choice he'd made to be something more. The gates had opened once. The past had tried to drag him in. But Tyrell had walked through and closed them behind him.